The fine art of sampling, cutting bits and pieces from existing recordings to gently mold them into your own stew, by your very own recipe.
Everybody does it in America.
And pretty much elsewhere. But it's true, when we think about sampling, we quickly link it to one country in particular. Why? There's probably an elephant in the room. Remember 1991? Some people call it the most important year in pop music history. Because, in the summer of that year, a hip-hop album actually led the Billboard Top 100. Hip-hop had become mainstream, and sampling was now big business. Bling bling, and the lawyers came in. Yeah, we love you too. But really, sampling has always been part of hip-hop's DNA, or as music critic Robert Christgau states it, hip-hop has vinyl roots. It sure has. Ever since DJ Kool Herc, who paved the way. It's the summer of 1973, and Kool Herc is about to throw a very memorable block party. He'd been watching his dance floor audience and noticed that people got most excited when the instrumental breaks of a record were playing. So he introduced a new trick that was as simple as it was ingenious. He wasn't just going to play two records after one another, as DJs used to do in the 1960s. Rather, he would isolate their instrumental breaks and let them flow into one another, creating a loop effect which Kool Herc nicknamed the merry-go-round. Occasionally, the DJ would spit some lyrics to further excite the audience. Yep, sounds like hip-hop. But sampling itself is much older. Now you may ask, what do you mean by sampling anyway? Okay, first we have to set our own record straight. By sampling we mean any recorded sound or music which is used to make a new composition based on those recordings. That's the major difference with the traditional way of music making. Sampling implies you're working with a three-step process, whereas all other forms of music imply a one-on-one relation between the musician and the music instrument. Bearing that in mind, let's continue our journey in time. Did we mention DJ Kool Herc is from Jamaica? Well, he'd learned a few tricks from his homies. It would explain why hip-hop owns a lot of its sound structure and attitude to Jamaican music culture. And especially to its most influential pioneers, Lee Scratch Perry and King Tubby. King Tubby gave rise to a genre called dub. Meanwhile, Lee Perry focused on scratching and sampling, two hip-hop techniques born in Jamaica. Perry was the first Jamaican producer to use rhythmic sound effects along with beats. Like in one of his early tracks, People Funny Boy, he used the sound of a crying baby. Meanwhile, interesting things were going on elsewhere in the music industry. We're talking rock and roll in the Psychedelic Sixties, when lead singers were drifting on stage, drummers got frantic, guitarists wanted to improvise and jam, and people dressed and behaved like they were breathing LSD. Holy moly, just have a look at the covers of psychedelic rock albums. You won't forget them, they really hurt your eyes. More to the point though, psychedelic rock bands were always on the lookout for new, less conventional sounds to reflect their spiritual worldview, which meant playing exotic and especially Indian instruments, but also turning to electronic equipment. It was a rare and unique chance for electronic sounds to be incorporated in popular music. Most bands used early synthesizers or electronic devices that could be played more or less like the average instrument, but some bands took to sampling as a way of branding their new sound. Amongst them, that one band from across the ocean, the Fab Four. In 1966, they recorded a highly innovative tape loop song, Tomorrow Never Knows. In 1968, they went even further with a sound collage track called Revolution 9. Finally, avant-garde techniques which had been around for almost 2 decades were coming into the wide open. This is of course begging the question, what avant-garde? Who had discovered the electronic universe all along? Well, prepare yourself for a shock. White men who'd been trained in classical music, guys who were hell-bent on experimenting. Let's take one very famous example. West Germany, 1956. Meet the young experimental composer Karl-Heinz Stockhausen. This man is a force to be reckoned with. By 1956, he had accomplished his first major composition, Gesang der Jugendliche, Song of the Youth. How to summarize this piece in less than a minute? Well, Stockhausen wanted to create a religious composition. He wanted to retell an old biblical story, where a Babylonian king had 3 Jewish young men thrown in the fire. Miraculously, they survived and they started praising the Lord, hence the title. Let's say that Stockhausen took the old story and translated it into the nuclear age. It's a 13-minute monument where samples of a singing choir boy are heavily manipulated and dropped into a pool of electronic sounds. Back in 1956, no one saw that one coming. Sure, sampling was already known and so was electronic sound, but both of them operating together? Groundbreaking. But not the first sample ever used. We have to push further back in time. France, 1948. In the spring of that year, a middle-aged sound engineer went to the train station of Batignolles around Paris to record train sounds. Next, he started manipulating the audio material, cutting, looping, reversing, etc. This operation was time-consuming. There were no software programs, no turntables, hell, there weren't even cassette tapes yet. In the early days of sound manipulation, it took around 20 minutes of work to get 1 second of good material. That is 3 seconds an hour. Go figure. So, the train recordings from Batignolles were slowly pieced into a composition titled Étude au chemin de fer, a railway study. The name of the composer, you ask? Pierre Schaeffer, a sound engineer working for the French Public Broadcasting Company. Yep, that's the profile you can expect from the pioneers of electronic music. Schaeffer is considered to be one of the founding fathers of sound art. The term he used was musique concrète, or concrete music. Although he didn't exactly leave us with tons of audio recordings, Schaeffer was a prolific writer and music theorist. And last but not least, Schaeffer rallied several other avant-garde composers around him, making him a key figure in electronic music. And presumably he was the very first composer to use samples? 1948. Going once, going twice.
Hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, that's right, wait a minute. Someone was there way before. 1930. Germany. Germans always tend to make a comeback, don't they? Ha ha ha. Meet Walter Ruttmann, a German experimental cinematographer. Walter's the guy in the middle. Yes, he may remind you of some 1920s movie poster, but don't let his looks deceive you. Ruttmann made some interesting productions, ranging from abstract animated films, to early movie commercials, and what one might call artistic documentaries. His best work is from the 1920s, because in the 1930s he had a different employer. But why do we mention Walter Ruttmann? The man was a film director. Well, back in early 1930, he made a very unique film that goes by the name of Wochenende, or Weekend. This movie doesn't contain a single image, but only sound. That's right. Imagine going to the silver screen to see absolutely nothing, but just to use your ears. You'd hear an audio film of 11 minutes, representing the relaxing weekend after a long week of hard labor. The first 3 minutes reflect the busy work life in the city. You hear telephone calls, business talk, mechanical noises, etc. This is followed by 8 minutes of sounds that evoke the relaxing weekend. Church bells, fanfare music, children's noises. Ruttmann took dozens of sound recordings, which he pasted one after the other. Unlike Pierre Schaeffer and the musique concrète school from the late 1940s, Ruttmann couldn't really manipulate the sounds he had isolated. But even so, Wochenende remains a remarkable achievement. Walter Ruttmann delivered the first composition made out of samples. Way back in 1930, he perfectly understood the revolutionary potential of recording technology. The year before, he had stated that everything audible in the world becomes material. That's the perfect way to describe sampling Walter. Everything audible in the world becomes material. Amen to that.